I'm working on making a top for my Lagun table, and I have a leftover piece of Hevea, which is what I use for the countertops in the van. It's unfortunately 1.5 inches and weighs a ton. It's probably 15 pounds plus. So I want to plane it down to maybe 3/4 of an inch or so it's more manageable height and just not so much unnecessary weight. And then I'll stain it to match the countertops. I think it'll look fantastic. I do not have a planer. I mean, even if I did, it'd be a 12-inch like most bench top ones, and this is 15 by 24. So I'm going to attempt to plane it down with a router. If that doesn't work, I can always take it somewhere and have them plane it down. I'm going to start with my trim router because I don't feel like getting all my big crap out. So we'll see how that works. Probably be a slow process. It's going to be several passes, but if I can get it taken down to about 3/4 of an inch, then I'll do an 1/8 inch round over on the edges and stain it to match, and it should look fantastic. Let's get started. I was able to get one layer down, taking off a 1/4 inch at a time. Would not recommend this method. It's really slow and painful, and leaving a pretty good surface. I'll sand this down. It's going to work. Took some off the edge over here. Thankfully it's the first pass and I can do a better job next time, but I think one more pass will probably get us where we want to be. You can see, if you didn't already guess why I was doing it in the middle of the garage floor, you can see why. It's making quite a mess. Again, wouldn't recommend doing this with a trim router, but this is what I have and I want to get this done today, and I think it's going to turn out fine. Well, that was awful, but we've got a, now after 3 passes, I've got a 7/8 inch thick tabletop. Unfortunately, because of the grain direction here, it's going to need some kind of reinforcement. Otherwise, it's bowing a touch already, and so I'll probably route out a relief in the back and then glue in a piece of Baltic birch or something, apply to help reinforce it. But overall, it turned out really, really nicely for that horribly ghetto method of planing there. Wouldn't recommend it. Took forever. Glad I have 8 batteries for my trim router. Probably trashed that bit. And I've got a boatload of sawdust to clean up. But it's done, and it saves trying to find a local shop that's probably going to charge me 30 or 50 bucks for a few passes with their planer, only to find out that I'm still going to have to do a relief cut to reinforce this thing. So anyway, that's where we are now. I'll have to come up with a plan, do a little more sanding, and see what we can do to stabilize it a bit. Alright, I spared you guys a lot of time spent with the trim router, but basically I took it down to an overall thickness of 3/4 of an inch, and that turned out beautifully. Like I said, it was bowed and there was just too much flex in it because of the direction of the butcher block and everything, so I ended up taking it down 1/2 inch deep relief all the way through here, which I'll be filling with this piece of marine ply. Marine ply is super heavy and rigid, so I'll glue that in there. It doesn't look pretty, and it was hell. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, routing that out with a trim router and a 1/2 inch deep groove in a hardwood, but it worked. I'll clean it up a bit. I'm going to chisel out the corners to square them up so I don't have to round off the corners of my donor piece of marine ply, and once that's laminated in here, I'll backfill it a little bit to clean it up, but it should look really nice, and it should be way more rigid that way. And other than that, I'm really happy with the piece. It's turned out pretty nicely, so that's where we are. So I got the relief cut pretty much perfect depth here. The marine ply is in there. That'll square up our tabletop. It's not a perfect fit. This is a really sketchy process. Not real safe cutting that deep with a trim router, but it worked. I'll backfill with sawdust and glue and sand this all down, and it's the bottom of the table anyway, so you won't ever see it. But real pleased with how it turned out. We will set up a jig on the bench to where I can make sure this is going to be straight as it dries. Because all this work was to prevent this from having the bow. So it'd be a shame to have a glue up and then glue it up with a bow. So that's where we are. Gonna start getting set up on the bench to get it glued. Well, I've got this glued up. Everything turned out good. Filling up another jug to stack on here. It's pretty hard to clamp this together with the clamps I have. Get it as firmly set up as we can. It looks great. Everything's perfectly level. I've got some pieces of aluminum angle that are super square. Make sure everything lays out the way we want it to. When this is done, I will go back and fill up this groove around the outside with a mixture of glue and sawdust to fill it in. We'll let that dry up, and then we'll sand the whole thing down. I'm going to do an 1/8 inch round over, possibly on the bottom and top. And then I'm going to do my best to stain it to match the countertops in the van, which are a mixture of gunstock, special walnut, and natural Minwax stains. Unfortunately, the first time I did it, they were old stain, and it did not match with the new stain when I ran out. So learned that lesson in sanding the van countertops down 2 or 3 times. So hopefully we won't end up in the same spot with this. But other than that, it's turned out really nicely and should be really strong and hold the screws into the Lagun mount. It needs to be strong because I'm mounting the arm offset to extend the reach of the table and also to allow more seating options. So see that when we get in the van. Check out my other video for the Lagun table mount on the side of the Sprinter seat box, and we'll pick this up after it's dried. Well, the tabletop's all glued up, dried overnight. I'm about to do an 1/8 inch round over on it with the trim router. Unfortunately, as it dried, it still has just a little bit of a bow, which is really annoying. But see what I can do with it and get this thing cleaned up along the edges and sanded, get it ready for stain. As I mentioned, this had a bit of a bow to it, so I've got it clamped down to the top of this trash can. I wetted it down yesterday, and I'm just seeing if we can bend it back a bit. It may or may not work, but put an awful lot of work into this thing not to have it lean to it, especially when it's on a Lagun table mount. If it's got any sag, it's just going to exacerbate it. So you can see how nicely the inset piece of marine ply came out, though. I'm real pleased with that. Worst case, I could always route this whole piece of marine ply back out and then laminate it again in a more bent orientation. I had it clamped perfectly straight, but I guess I should have gone a bit negative, even though there was only a 1/4 inch of hardwood left. I did not think it would have enough force to bend the marine ply, but I've been proven wrong. So here we are. I'm gonna leave this clamped up for a day or two and hope that we get lucky. And I'll report back. Alright, I made a jig and clamped this thing up for about 48 hours. I wet it down, put some microfiber cloths on top of it, wet, to keep it moist, and it has bent back quite nicely. It's been about another 12 hours since then, and it's pretty close to perfectly straight, so I'm very happy with it now. It stretched it enough to crack the filler on my inlay there, my inset piece of marine ply, which is just fine. I'll fill that again and sand it again, and nothing's ever easy on van projects. A simple 15 by 24 eating surface has become a long project. But next step, if it warps back any more over time, I'm going to route out a 1/2 inch groove here, a 1/2 inch groove here, deep and wide, and then use a piece of probably aluminum bar stock or round stock, and I'll epoxy it in on both of them, so that'll guarantee that it stays straight. I'm hoping not to have to do that because that's just an obscene amount of effort for such a simple tabletop, but I've got so many man hours in this dang thing now that I'm certainly not going to give up. But right now it's perfect, so I'm going to fill it, sand it. We'll start with 80 grit, get it down to probably 220, and then we will mix up the 3 shades of stain that we used in the van on the countertops and see if we can get a good match. And then after that dries for a few days, we'll do the Osmo Poly X to seal it, and we'll be done. Let's get started. I really like to use this DAP plastic wood for filler. It's good stuff. If it dries up, You can just pour a little bit of acetone in there and it softens it back up. It's really strong when it's dry. It takes stain fairly well. It matches almost perfectly with this Hevea. You can barely see it. And they sell it in different tints. And unlike Minwax tubes of Minwax filler and stuff like that, it actually lasts. And again, adding acetone to it, you can keep it going for a long time, and it's not expensive. So pretty good stuff. The other good one is the Durham's Rock Hard, which is a powder, and you add water and mix it to the consistency that you like, and that's really good stuff as well. And of course, that has no shelf life because it's just powder. Being acetone based, this stuff dries really fast, which is great for short working time, but you can get sanding on it in just a few minutes, especially on a shallow imperfection. It's real quick. So I'm gonna flip this over, start with the 80 grit and work it down, and then by the time I'm done on the top and cleaning up the corners some, this will all be dry and ready for, again, 80 grit, and we should be done and ready for stain. All right, I've got the wood fillers dry, and I've gone over the whole thing with 220. It looks great, so I'm very pleased. I'm not going to go crazy. Don't need to do anything else. I'm ready for stain, so I'm going to start this kind of ballpark mixing my stains. I did write down the kind of formula I used with the original stain, but as I think I mentioned earlier, stains were all old, and now I've gotten a new can of special walnut, so the color was very different. I imagine it had evaporated and reduced a bit to where the special walnut was a lot darker, so I'm just going to have to mess with it until I get the color right and hope that I don't end up sanding the thing down 2 or 3 times like I did the countertops in the van. Well, that's all for tonight. Turned out great. Don't have any sanding marks in the wood after the first coat of stain. It's a little lighter than the counters in the van, so I'm going to do one more coat of probably just walnut over the top of this after this one dries, and then I'll keep tinting it until it gets close enough matched to the van countertops, and we'll give it a couple days and seal it. It should be in good shape, and bolt it up to the Lagun table mount and get to using it. I've done 3 coats of stain. I've got the original one, which was some mixture of 3 separate stains, and then the last 2 coats were just special walnut. So it looks great. It matches the countertops really nicely. We'll give it a few days to dry before we put the Osmo Polyax sealant on there. And in the meantime, I've got the Lagun table base, which we'll be mounting. We'll talk about it in the other videos. Maybe at the beginning of this one, it'll be offset, which gives us a lot more seating options as far as what the table will service. So I'll show you when it gets in the van, but basically the B pillar gives us just under 2 inches to where this will be able to go up against the wall and kind of out of the way when we're not using it in our camping configuration, because of course it'll be removed when we're driving. So in the meantime, we're going to mount this an 1/8 under 2 inches from the edge, and then we about 3.5 inches in. So we're going to go ahead and get measuring and get this Lagun table mount screwed in. I'm going to temporarily use some black oxide screws that I have, and I have stainless number 10, I believe they specify for the, or number 8s. They specify number 8s for the Lagun mount for these holes. You could always drill them out if you wanted to. But so I've got number 8 by 3/4 inch stainless screws coming, and they're a little larger diameter than what I'm using. So this ones I'm using now is just kind of a mock-up. So we're gonna get started with getting this guy mounted. Temporary screws, I'm going to be using these stingers. They're made by Install Bay, and 500 of them. I got 3/4 and 1/2 inch long, and they're just black oxide coated. They're really good. They self-tap into most things. They've got a lot of thread. They're really good, just universal screws to have around if you don't already have some. We obviously don't want to drill through here. I've got drill collars, but they're too small for this bit, so I just put a flag on there, and I'm really careful because that'd be a real shame to drill through. So until we're ready to seal it, that's about it. Our finishing touch. For an extra $12 on your order, you can get some covers that just close up these open areas at the end of the table mount. Give it a nice finished look. And that $12 on top of your order gets you to $200, which gives you free shipping. So may as well get the covers. Got another one that goes to one of the top posts. We'll put that on later. Looks really nice. Let's go set it in the van and see how this is gonna look. So that was my biggest limiting factor for the placement of the table on the base, was that I wanted it to be able to sit flush against this wall and kind of out of the way to, number one, kind of extend counter space and also not block the aisle. So if you needed to use the commode, you could just move this out of the way. But this will service these two seats, and also the passenger seat extends and it'll service these two seats. So it's should be pretty versatile. Tighten this up a bit. It'll help with the sag, but it's pretty solid. The Lagun claims 50 pounds of weight, which includes the tabletop. This weighs probably 5 pounds. So I don't imagine we'll be doing 45 pounds of anything on here, as long as you don't fall on it or sit on it. It seems really strong. I think it looks great. It matches the countertops pretty much perfectly. So we've got some height adjustability if we need it, and that's about it. So we'll seal this up after a few days with some Osmo Poly-X if you haven't used that. So I think it's from England. It's oil, but seals the wood. It's what I use on the countertops and on a lot of other projects. It's fantastic. It's fairly expensive. It's about $50 for a quart, but it's worth it. And it's easy to reapply, unlike polyurethanes. It doesn't require any prep work to reapply it. It's just really good stuff. So that's that. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I'd appreciate you hitting the subscribe button. I got lots of projects coming up in the van. Got a diesel heater going in, should be here today, and several other small, just finishing up projects, and I've still got a van tour video to do. So those are all coming. Hope this video helps somebody.